My guest is Christina Cuffari. She's the Director of Sales Technology for Prudential and Individual Solutions Group. Her focus is on helping advisors like me, integrate best practices as it pertains to technology, social media, cybersecurity, best practices, and broker-dealer systems. So mouthful there, but bottom line is what she's going to be talking about is a lot about cybersecurity, as that's obviously something that is very top of mind for people these days with all the things that we hear about identity theft and things in the news recently. One thing before we get started, I understand that Christina, you're a pretty, or I don't know if you still are, but were a pretty amazing soccer player. So tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. So that might be a little bit in my past. I'm a little bit washed up, as they call it these days. But I had been playing for probably about 4 or 5 years after college, but I have not played now in a while, and of course not with the pandemic going on. I don't know if how long I'd be able to run for, maybe 10 minutes tops.
Well, you were pretty good. Like I looked at your bio and you were All-American and all that. Give yourself a little bit of kudos here. It seems like you are not just just the run-of-the-mill soccer player. You actually competed at a pretty high level.
Yeah, I got really lucky. I was recruited when I was in high school, so kind of young, and I kind of let my parents do a lot of the work for me, and they found a really great school that I had a great coach. I still have some of my close friends from that team. So all in all, it was a really good experience. I definitely miss those days a lot. That's for sure.
I think we all do, as most of the people know who may be on this. No, Brandon was actually a soccer player himself back in the day, and I know you've spoken with Brandon a little bit, Christina.
Yeah.
Talking. So yeah, no, it's been. I think soccer runs strong in this webinar today. All right. Well, let's jump into this. The agenda for today. What Christina is going to talk about first is the introduction. Why is this so important? What are some of the different things that have happened in the news lately that have brought this to everyone's conscious? But then talk about how we can, number one, deter the thieves, the identity thieves. 2, detect when something like this happens, and then ultimately defend against it. So she'll come up with some really, she has some really good strategies that are really kind of hands-on and easy to implement to try to protect people from identity theft and things like that. So before I turn the microphone over to Christina, I do have a disclosure that I need to read. So this is presented by Brendan Sheehan with Waymark Wealth Management and guest speaker Christina Cuffari, Director of Sales Technology for Prudential's Investor Solutions Group. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member at FINRA, SIPC. Christina Cuffari and Prudential are not affiliated or endorsed by LPL Financial and Waymark Wealth Management. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield a positive outcome. Phew. All right. With that said, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you, Christina. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. And what I'll do is I will go ahead and share my screen here just so we have a little bit of background as I'm talking here. But again, my name is Christina Cuffari. I'm the Director of Sales Technology here at Prudential. And really what my role is like Brandon said, to help advisors utilize technology that they utilize on a day-to-day basis and really create efficiencies with those technologies to ultimately help them with their business. And in those conversations, in working with advisors, one of the things that kept coming up was the ability to help clients protect their personal information outside and over and above what your firm is doing to protect your information. We know that right now within this space, within privacy protection, within identity theft, there are so many different tricks, there are so many different scams that you can fall victim to. And sometimes it's really hard to know what's the best course of action. What are you supposed to be doing? What are you supposed to rely on companies to do for you? And so what we really wanted to talk about and help clients was to help them maintain their personal information. So anything that they can do on an individual basis to really take control of their personal information and really help protect it. And also with that, having an understanding of how we exchange information and why some of our information is being exchanged, maybe without even necessarily realizing. And that was really the big thing for a lot of clients. They simply just didn't realize they were sharing as much information as they were. And once they can correct some of those behaviors, it becomes a lot easier to protect your information. And so again, what we'll talk about are ways to deter, detect, and defend against identity theft. But before we jump into those, I just kind of want to mention how we got to this point. I know that identity theft is not a new crime, right? This has been happening for years and years and years, if not decades. But the frequency at which it is happening today is certainly unprecedented and certainly higher than what we've seen previously. And the biggest reason for that is the internet. The internet was actually created in 1990, and they give credit to a scientist named Tim Berners-Lee, who created the internet as a means for him to share his research findings with other scientists. Now, obviously, we know that the military had some form of the internet, but it wasn't publicly available in our individual households until around 1990. And it's kind of crazy to think about that the internet has only been around for 30 years. And the reason why it's kind of crazy is because our entire lives, for the most part, revolve around the internet. And I know we never like to admit that to ourselves, but the reality is we are always connected to the internet, whether it's our cell phones, whether it's our email, whether it's our TV, we're streaming shows, music. I've now even seen the ability for you to connect your refrigerator, your thermostat, your toaster oven to the internet, right? Everything that we do now revolves around the internet. And that's why we're having and seeing such an increase in identity-related incidents. Because a lot of times when we're on the internet, we don't even realize half the information that we're exchanging. And there's a really great example of this. So in 2019, they did a study, and they basically just tracked all of the active things that we do on the internet. And what you see on this slide here, these aren't all the things, of course not, but these are the most popular, the most common things that we do on the internet on a day-to-day basis. And they broke it down into an internet minute just to give us a sense of how much we're utilizing the internet. So in 2019, we sent 18 million text messages every minute. We sent 188 million emails. And then one of my personal favorites, we spent over $996,000 every minute in online shopping in 2019. And again, this is active information. So you know you're sending that text message or that email, and you know you're typing your credit card information into that online order purchase. But there's also a lot of passive information that we exchange without realizing. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. We're going to give you some strategies to help eliminate some of this passive data. And for those of you that have no idea what passive data is, one of the easiest examples of passive data is how many of you have ever been browsing for family vacations, or maybe you're on the internet to try to find a flight to go visit a friend or family member. So you're doing all of this research, right? You're trying to figure out where's the best place to go, when's the best time to go, how can I get the best cost? And if you don't book that trip or buy that airline ticket, and you walk away from your computer, when you go back the next day, or honestly, even a couple of hours later, what you'll notice is that you now have all these advertisements geared towards those vacations that you were just searching, or those flights that you were just browsing. And that has to do with the passive information that we exchange. Because for a lot of us, when we use the internet, we assume that we're not sharing any information. We're not giving away any information.
But the reality is all of these search engines, all of these social media sites, all of these things that we quote unquote use for free are truly not free. And I think a lot of us are starting to see that when you're not physically paying to utilize a surface, you're paying with your data, you're paying with your information. And a lot of times what happens is these companies are tracking everything, right? So you're going to Google and you're typing in family vacation destination. And they're tracking what you type into Google, what websites you click on, how long do you stay on those websites? Does your mouse accidentally hover over any of the advertisements on that website? They're also tracking information from your IP address, and your IP address can contain some personal and demographic information about you. Most specifically, it can tell you where that computer is geographically located. So as we go through this presentation here, like we talked about, we're gonna show you different ways that you can help mitigate some of this passive data and help avoid sending, because although it might not seem like a big deal on the surface, if it were to fall into the wrong hands, or if someone with the right skills comes across that information, it could be very damaging.
Hey, Christina, before you jump into the next thing, I'm gonna put in a quick plug. Pretty much everything that Christina just mentioned is featured in a Netflix movie that's pretty popular. It's called Social Dilemma. I'm not sure if you're gonna actually talk about that, but it's pretty eye-opening. Again, the Social Dilemma, I think, a lot of the stuff that they talk about are things that I think we all suspected was going on, but when you actually see it all balled up into one, you start realizing, wow, you know, just I think what Christina said is very accurate, that all this information, all this technology seems free, but ultimately you're paying for it with your privacy.
Exactly. So The Social Dilemma is a great documentary for anyone to watch, just to really get a sense of, you know, on what scale is this happening and how frequent it's happening. I'll give you another one as well. This one came out a little bit before The Social Dilemma, and that really just talks about how these social media sites go about getting your attention and gaining your attention. There's another one called The Great Hack. That one's actually available on Netflix. And what it talks about is essentially the Cambridge Analytica and the Facebook scandal. And really what it goes into is the power of this influence, the power of these big companies and what they have on our day-to-day lives. And so although a lot of that doesn't necessarily have to do with some of the smaller ways that we're going to protect our information, it does definitely play into the larger scheme that these companies have a lot of access and they have a lot of information, and they're using that information to their advantage without consumers knowing. And I think once consumers can really start to understand what data, how it's collected, and how it's being used, they can really then start to protect themselves, defend themselves, and decide which data they want to share and which data they do not want to share. And I think that will be the biggest difference moving forward with all of the knowledge coming from these documentaries. This actually is kind of a nice segue to this slide here, which is essentially kind of a graveyard. We know that a lot of major companies that we do business with are having a tough time keeping track of our information, or maybe even taking more information from us than they had previously led on. And typically, these major data breaches are what we see most often. And it's not because it happens more frequently than some of these other scams, it's just simply because this is what tends to make the news. These are the types of numbers, these are the types of scams that tend to get the most media attention. And for a lot of consumers, this is really frustrating because for some of these companies, they simply have your information just based on the nature of the business that they're in, not necessarily because you decided to do business with them. And one of the easiest examples of this is Equifax. So in 2017, Equifax experienced a major data breach. 85% of adult Americans in the US were impacted by this data breach. And the impact was their full name, their date of birth, their social security number, and their home address. And so for those of you that are not familiar, those are the big four. Those are the four things that I need in order to completely steal someone's identity and begin opening up fraudulent accounts in their name. So this is some pretty serious stuff, and it's happening on a really large scale. And one of the things that's really tough about this is you don't always have the ability to protect yourself beforehand. And so what we'll talk about throughout the presentation are ways that you can protect yourself almost after the fact, or to avoid any negative repercussions from one of these companies having a data breach with your information. And one common misconception that I want to talk about really quickly before we jump in is that identity theft only happens to older folks. And the reality is that's just not true. You can be more susceptible to certain types of scams, certain types of fraud as you get older. But the reality is you can be a victim of identity theft regardless of where you are at within that life cycle. Currently, we know right now children are being targeted 10 times more often than adults for their social security numbers. So it's really important to make sure that you're protecting all of the people in your close circle, in your family, especially for that sandwich generation, because you'll have to protect you and your spouse, you'll have to protect your kids, but then you'll also have to protect your older relatives and loved ones that you're helping to take care of as well. All right, so let's talk about how we can deter against identity theft. The first tip here, pretty simple, and I know that it's not groundbreaking, is just shredding your documents. We know that most people today still are not shredding their documents. And we know that because criminals are still able to go through your trash, they're still able to go through junkyards and dump sites, and they're still able to find pieces of mail that have your full name, that have your address, and that have certain account numbers still available to them. And again, in a post-Equifax world, in a post-data breach world where all of these companies are leaking sensitive information, having 2 or 3 pieces of your personal information is very damaging, because it might not take that much effort to get that last and final piece, to get access to your social security number or your birth date. So what we recommend is that you shred all of the documents that are coming to your house, especially the mail that you're not opening. Because if you're not opening your mail, then you can't determine whether or not it has sensitive or personal information of yours on it. One of the really big culprits of this is pre-approved credit card offers. And they are dangerous because a lot of times they come pre-filled out. Typically, you only need to add your birth date or your social security number, and whoever has access to that envelope can open that account, can cash that check, can get that credit card up and working. And so one of the ways to protect yourself against this is you can actually go to this website that you see here on the slide, www.optoutprescreen.com. This is the do not call list for pre-approved credit card offers. So I've personally signed up for this, and since I have not received any of these pre-approved offers to the house. But keep in mind, it's per social security number. So if you're married, you'd have to do it for you and your spouse, or anyone over the age of 18 in your household, to really make sure you're not getting any of those offers sent to the house. You can opt out for 5 years, and you can do that right online, or you can opt out indefinitely, so forever. And that would require that you type up a letter, unfortunately, and mail it into the credit bureaus, but that would remove you from these pre-approved offers forever. So if that's something that you're interested in, I would definitely take the 2 or 3 minutes that it would take to type up the letter, because it would make things a lot easier.
Hey, Christina, one quick thing that I wanted to ask about with regards to shredding, and I'm going to throw my mother under the bus for a second here. Her idea of shredding is ripping something in half, and maybe if she's feeling so enthusiastic, she might do it another time and shred it into fourths. But what would be I know there's cross shredders and all sorts of different shredding tools. What would you recommend?
Yeah, so typically what they recommend is a cross shredder that's going to cut your documents into at least 16 different pieces. And the reason that they recommend cross shredders as opposed to just a straight shredder is because there are certain people with certain skills that can take a bag of shredded paperwork or shredded documents and basically reconstruct them in almost no time at all. And that's really the risk that you run by just ripping up your documents, because if someone's going through that bag of trash, all they need to do is maybe put 3 or 4 pieces of tape together, and now they have that document with all that information. Using something like a cross shredder, if someone were to get into your trash and put that all back together, you know, at some point, there's only so many things that you can do to help protect yourself, but that's really what gives you the best chance of success. And the reason for that is because what people don't realize is it's not so much criminals going through your trash at your house, but after it's picked up by your garbage removal service, it goes to a dump. And those dumps a lot of times are not monitored. And a lot of times if you're going through there, you could just take bags of trash that have every piece of information in there that they need to reconstruct it. So as the best top practice, it would be a cross shredder. And then when you dispose of those documents, you take half of the trash, you put it in one bag, let the garbage pick that up, and then the next week you put the rest of it in there so that your documents are all never together in one bag of trash when you get rid of them. Now, of course, that's excessive and that is a lot, and I'm sure most of us are not going to go to those extremes. But if you are going to be shredding your documents, a cross shredder of up to 16 slices is probably the safest way you could go about it. Okay, now for the fun part, talking about our cell phones. We're going to spend a couple of minutes here, so feel free to jump in if you have some questions or if you have anything to add. We're going to talk through passwords and we're going to talk through location services specifically. So first and foremost, anyone on the call today, if you have a smartphone, it is imperative that you have a password on your device. Now, I know sometimes folks will say, well, you know, I don't really have anything to hide. And the reality is it's not true. We all have things to hide on our cell phones. And the reason for that is because we have our cell phones with us almost 24 hours a day. So if nothing else, your cell phone has every text message you've ever sent unless you've deleted it. And just in that alone, you have so many messages from the people you care about most, potentially addresses, dates of birth, right? Holidays, things that you're doing together. And there's a lot of personal information shared in your text messages that you might not realize. Also, we have our email on our phone. We have our banking applications. We have E-Trade. We have our credit cards on there, right? We have anything and everything on our phones because they're little computers that we have in our pocket. And because of that, it's important to have a password on your device. Because if that device were to be lost or worse, purposely stolen, you've now given away all the keys to the kingdom. Because if I can get into your phone, most likely I can pretty much get into anything of yours. Because for a lot of us, we leave all of our passwords saved in our phone. So all I need to do is get through that 4 or 6-digit passcode, and now I'm into everything. And so what we recommend in order to protect your cell phone, we know that right now, a lot of criminals are using algorithms to guess our passwords. And these algorithms are really sophisticated. Just to give you a sense of how sophisticated, it can crack a 4-digit passcode in less than 1 minute. It can crack a 6-digit passcode in less than an hour. And the reason for that is because when you're only using numbers, which most of us use in our PIN code, right, numbers 1 through 9, there's only so many different possibilities of what that password could be, right? Only so many different possibilities for that 4-digit, which is about 10,000, only so many different possibilities for that 6-digit, which is about 1 million. And so the algorithm will just guess over and over and over again until it cracks that passcode. So as a best practice, one of the safest things you can do for your mobile device is to create a password that's a combination of numbers and letters. Most phones, if they are issued after 2015, will allow you this capability. And what that will do is by making a password that's numbers and letters, it increases the number of possibilities of what that password could be, which in turn makes it more difficult for the algorithm to guess those passwords, which in turn makes it much more secure and much safer for your device to have a password that's a combination of numbers and letters. It just gives you an added layer of protection. Now, moving on to location services. This is probably one of the most important aspects of this presentation, and location services probably equate to up to 50% of the passive information that we exchange. The reason for that is because for most of us, every time we download a new application onto our devices, it asks us 2 questions. Can we send you push notifications? And can we access your location? Now, the New York Times actually did an investigative study on these companies on location services, and the results are pretty alarming. essentially what they concluded was that when we grant access to these companies to access our location, in the user agreements that none of us read, in these user agreements, these companies are telling you, hey, since you've given us the right to access your location, we now have the right to sell that information to up to 30 other companies. So you think you're sharing your location with just one company that you know, that you trust, but in reality, they're telling you, when you share your location with us, we're going to sell that, and we're going to sell it to up to 30 other companies. And from all of this, what the New York Times concluded was that these companies are actually capable of pinging your location every 18 seconds. And on the surface, that might not be that damaging, right? But when you think about it, these companies have a lot of information about you, and they're not necessarily protecting it the way that you hope that they would. And so if that information were to fall into the wrong hands, it could be damaging and it could be negatively used against you. Because if you think about it, if they know where you're at every 18 seconds, that means they know where you live, they know where you drop your kids off to school, they know where you go to work, they know where you go to the gym, your favorite lunch place, right? Where your grandparents live, your favorite restaurants, all the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And the idea, the reason that they're doing it is because they're trying to best advertise to us, right? They're trying to understand you as a consumer so they can sell to you better. But the problem is they're not taking responsibility or control of all of the other information that they're collecting. And so it's important for us to really manage the applications that we're granting access to our location. You should only allow an application access to your location if it really needs it, right? So we know that if you're using a GPS app, right, that obviously needs to have your location. It needs to know where you're at, needs to know where you're going, and it will help you get there. Your Uber app, right, needs to know where you're at so I can come pick you up. But there's other applications that absolutely do not need access to your location. Your camera is a perfect example. Your camera application does not need to know where you're at 100% of the time. Hopefully you can just figure it out by looking at the picture that you took, right? And so what we recommend is that you go through the list of applications that you've granted access to your location and remove any app that doesn't really need access to your location for that app to work properly. Also, when you're going through this list, you'll notice that you'll have the opportunity or the option to select from 3 different options. So if you're going to allow an app to use your location, you can allow it to use it always, while using, or never. There is no application other than a work-issued security application that always needs access to your location. You should never allow an application to always have access. If it does need access, it should only be while using. While you're using that application, they can track your location. Once you are not using that application any longer, they can no longer track your location or have access to your whereabouts. And that will significantly reduce the amount of passive information that you're exchanging. Also, what we've found is that disabling location services on apps that don't need it can also help minimize robocalls. So if you're someone that's getting bombarded still with robocalls, a lot of it has to do with that passive information. So the more you can start limiting that information, the less your information will be shared. Hopefully, the less frequent you'll be contacted. Okay, any questions before we move on here? Okay, let's keep going. Following suit with our passcode on our device, I want to talk about passwords. Now, first of all, if you have any passwords on the right-hand side of the screen here, I encourage you to change your passwords. Your passwords stink. These are the worst passwords you could possibly have. 23 million people right now have the password 123456. It is not safe. It's not secure. These passwords are the first passwords that these algorithms guess. They're the lowest hanging fruit. And because people want to very easily remember their own password, they're taking unnecessary risks with their information. Now, we talked about the algorithm a little bit. And if you take a look at this password here, I love my 2 dogs. We know that it would take the algorithm 150 years to guess this particular password. And the reason for that is because it contains upper and lowercase letters, it contains special characters, and it contains numbers. So again, when you utilize all of these different criteria, when you increase the number of possibilities of what that password could be, it makes that password safer and more secure. That's why every time you go to a site and it asks you to create a password, they're making you create some convoluted password that's so hard for you to remember. It's actually for your benefit. It's for your safety and security. But for us, it's just tough because we forget all of our passwords almost immediately after making them. So one of the things that you can do to help protect against this, and I'll say help because there is no perfect science to this, but the best case scenario right now to protect your passwords is to use an encrypted storage password application. The reason why this is the safest bet is because, one, your passwords are protected. So they are password protected. And in addition to that, they're all encrypted when they sit on this application, when they sit on the server of this app. Now, the reason that it's the safest bet is because typically where we keep our passwords right now are unprotected. We keep them on a sheet of paper in our desk, maybe a Post-it note, maybe on an Excel spreadsheet, or maybe in the notes application of our phone. Either way, typically none of these are password protected or encrypted. Now, in a perfect world, the safest place to keep your passwords would be in your memory, right? The second you put those passwords into an app on a sheet of paper, you are taking a risk. The reality is, for most of us, we have no choice. We can't remember all of our passwords. We have to do something with them. And these encrypted storage applications right now are your best option. Because like I said, there's one master password that protects all of your passwords. So the idea here is that you would only ever need to remember one password. That would give you the ability to create different passwords for all of your different usernames and logins. Now, last thing I will touch upon very quickly here is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is by far the safest thing you can utilize when you're logging into your account. And it does exactly what it says. It uses multi-factors to authenticate you into your account. Typically, the way that it works is we have one factor, right? We have a username and a password, and that gets us into our account. What multi-factor does is it adds an extra step. So you type in that username, you type in that password, and then you need to type in the PIN number that is sent to you either through a phone call or a text message. So essentially, it adds another layer to that login process, which makes it safer and more secure. Whenever that's available, I encourage you to use it. I know sometimes people think that it's not as safe and secure because you have to give them your phone number. But the reality is that if someone were to log into your account, they would need your username, your password, and your phone in their hand in order to access that code, in order to be able to log in. Now, because multi-factor is so much safer and so much more secure, we're starting to see a new scam develop. And it really started in 2017 and has been growing ever since. And essentially what's happening is because criminals cannot access our accounts because multi-factor is working so well, they have now decided they need a different way, right? We know that criminals don't just retire. We know that they don't just give up when things get difficult. They just find a new way into the account. So what they're doing now is they're doing something called porting your cell phone number. And porting is just a fancy word for stealing. They're stealing your cell phone. So what will happen is they'll call into your cell phone provider and they will essentially get them to move your information from your device onto a device that they currently possess. There's a lot of ways to do this. Typically, the way that they're going to do it is they're just going to pose as you, right? So let's say that I know, Brendan, that you have Verizon, right? So I can call Verizon and I could say, hey, this is Brendan. I broke my phone this morning, right? My dog ate it. I dropped it in the sink. I ran it over with the car. Whatever sad sob story I can come up with. And I'm really going to play it, right? I'm going to say, I need access to my phone. This is devastating. I need to work. I need to get in touch with my spouse. I need to know where my kids are at. Like this, I can't go a day without my cell phone. Can you please move my number from this broken phone onto this older phone that I have? because I need my phone. I'll go to the store in a week or something and get a new phone, right? And we've all had these stories before. We've all broken our phone. So we all know that when we don't have our phone or when we need our phone, it is kind of chaotic, right? There is a little bit of stress to it. And so what's happening is the cell phone provider is actually moving that number from your working device onto this criminal's device that they are posing as you. And now with that access, they can multi-factor into your account. There's actually a really easy way to prevent this from happening. All you need to do is call your cell phone carrier, regardless of who it is, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint, Boost, Cricket, Metro, don't care. They'll all allow you this ability. Call into your provider, tell them you would like to set up a PIN to secure your mobile device. And think of this PIN similar to your debit card, right? You cannot take money out of an ATM unless you insert your card and insert your PIN. Well, you cannot make any changes to your cell phone account unless you give them this PIN number. And that will allow an added layer of protection onto your account. The reality is this feature actually has been around for a while. You've been able to add this to your account for at least the past 5 to 8 years, but it really hasn't been important or critical for people to utilize this until recently. So again, I would encourage you, it will take about 2 minutes, call your carrier, tell them you want to set up that PIN. That way you can rest assured that no one can multi-factor into your accounts without your knowledge. Okay, now let's talk about how we can detect against identity theft. This is probably the #1 question I get from advisors, the #1 question I get from clients. How do I know if someone has compromised my information? How do I know if someone's taken out any fraudulent accounts in my name? The easiest way for you to determine this information is to pull your credit report. Your credit report is your financial transcript. It has every single line of credit that you have ever opened, whether it's still open today or currently closed. So if someone has opened a fraudulent account in your name, it will be on your credit report. Now, you'll see on the website below, www.annualcreditreport.com, you are actually entitled to 3 completely free credit reports every calendar year. And you can access all 3 of them from this website down here at the bottom, annualcreditreport.com. You're entitled to 1 free credit report per major credit bureau. And the 3 major credit bureaus are Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. So what we always recommend for clients is go on to annualcreditreport.com every 4 to 5 months. So go on in January, pull your Equifax credit report. Go on in April and May, pull your Experian credit report. Go on in August, September, pull your TransUnion credit report. Every time you pull your credit report, make sure that the information on there is accurate, it's correct, it's something that you're responsible for. If you notice something suspicious on your credit report, right there on your credit report will be the instructions to start the process to remove something that you don't recognize, or to simply ask the question, hey, is this a mistake? Is this supposed to be on my credit report? One caveat that I will say, although it's kind of hard to believe, but sometimes they do just make mistakes. So don't panic if you see something on there that doesn't necessarily make sense. It could be fraud, but it also could simply be a mistake. You'll go through the process, you'll provide the documentation, and the credit bureau will then go ahead and fix if it's their error or close that account if it is fraud. So again, you'll have those steps and instructions on how to do that as soon as you pull that credit report. The steps will be right there for you. Now, one thing that I wanted to talk about very quickly is credit card fraud. Now, we've seen a lot of credit card fraud happen over the years. And for a lot of us, we don't even necessarily think as credit card fraud as fraud anymore. And the reason for that is because our credit card carriers have made it so easy for us, right? So once you notice a fraudulent charge, you call your credit card carrier, you tell them that it's a fraudulent charge, they reverse that transaction, they send you a new card out, and you're on your way. For some of us, they even tell you that they think fraud has happened before you even notice. And so what has happened for a lot of consumers is they don't necessarily take the precautions with their credit card as they should, because it's so easy to reverse the damage. But the reality is that there's still a lot of fraud that happens. In 2020, prior to the pandemic, when this prediction was made, they still think that losses would get up to $12 billion this year. So we know that these are real dollars. We know that this is still a problem. Now, one of the small silver linings here is that in 2015, we all got new cards that had these fancy chips in them. And these chips are safer and more secure, and they have helped a little bit. So from 2018 to 2019, that was actually the first year that credit card fraud decreased from the previous year instead of increasing, right? Since credit cards have been around, fraud has just only ever increased year over year. 2018 and 2019 was the first year that it actually decreased instead of increasing. So we're getting there. Again, we still have a lot of work to do. Part of the reason why our cards are safer and more secure is because of that chip. Now, the way that the chip works is actually really interesting. So in the past, when we were using our card prior to the chip, you would go to a vendor, you would swipe that magnetic strip, right? That little black strip on the back of your card. You would swipe that magnetic strip, and that machine would send your credit card information in a transaction to your bank, letting them know that you're making a purchase. So it's kind of obvious to see how if that transaction was intercepted, they could very easily extract your credit card number and be on their way. Well, what happens today is when you insert that chip into the card reader, instead of sending your credit card information, it sends a one-time PIN from that machine to your bank, letting them know that you're making a purchase. So your credit card information is never exchanged in that transaction. That is why using your chip is safer and more secure. One best practice, though, is that even still today, when you swipe that magnetic strip, you're still sending your credit card information in that transaction. So it's really important to utilize that chip reader. I know that certain places that you frequent might not have active chip readers or might not be choosing to use that chip reader. If that's the case, what we recommend is using cash, right? Try to avoid at all costs swiping that magnetic strip. If you can't pay cash, if you don't have cash on you, the next best thing is to use one credit card that you don't really use that frequently at these sketchier places, because then if fraud does happen, you have a very good idea of exactly where it happened. One of the biggest problems with our credit cards right now is by the time you realize that fraud has occurred, you've already used that card 20, 30, maybe 40 times that month. And so it's really tough to figure out where fraud could have happened, what business it may have been. So if you use one card at some of these sketchier locations, you might be able to really pinpoint exactly when and where that fraud occurred to then avoid those locations or use cash specifically at those locations. Okay. Now, one last thing I want to cover before we talk about how to defend against identity theft is I want to talk about phishing emails. And I want to actually show a personal example to the group because I think that it would be very, very helpful here. So let's go ahead and share this. I want to just show you one quick thing. You can see this, right? Okay. So I have received a phishing email here, and we'll get into what that email is for right now. But what I want to just talk about really quickly are phishing attempts. And the reason why I want to spend some time here is because since the start of this pandemic, phishing attempts have increased over 500%. So most likely your clients have experienced some type of phishing attempt since the start of this pandemic, probably multiple phishing attempts since the start of this pandemic. And a couple of things to note about phishing emails. First and foremost, phishing emails, there's two different types, and they're designed to do one thing and one thing only. The first type of phishing email is designed to get you to download some type of virus, some type of malware, some type of software onto your device that you do not want on there. And the way that they will do this is they will send you an email and they will try to bait you into clicking on any links or attachments in that email. This is probably the least common type of phishing attempt. So this is not as popular as the other type. This is one that you might not see as often. And the important thing to note here is if you open an email and it looks suspicious to you, and they will look a little suspicious to you, right? Something won't be right. Simply delete it, right? The important thing is you cannot get a virus simply by opening an email. You get a virus by clicking on any links or attachments in that email. So if you open an email and you think to yourself, oh God, what have I done? This looks suspicious. I need to throw my computer out now, right? No need to panic. If you didn't click on any links or attachments in that email, you can delete it. You can send it off to the FCC. You can report it as spam or phishing. But simply removing it from your device will make sure that you have done exactly what you need to do.
Hey, Christina.
Now, the second type of...
Can you just maximize the PowerPoint? Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Now, the second type of phishing attempt, which is much more common, which is probably something that all of us have experienced, whether we realize it or not. And this phishing attempt is designed to get you to personally give away your information. So you'll get an email that'll say, hey, we've experienced fraud on your account. We need you to verify your information. We need you to verify your contact information. We need you to update your cell phone number, your social security number, your date of birth, right? So essentially what they're doing is they're trying to prompt you into giving away your own information. And that's actually what I have an example of here. So I received an email from American Express. Now, typically the 5 most common phishing attempts that you will receive are going to be from Amazon, Apple, American Express, Netflix, and Bank of America. There is no rhyme or reason to this other than those typically are the 5 most popular companies that one way or another, most of us as consumers have some type of relationship with one of them. And so when we receive emails from them, they're not alarming. We expect them, we're used to them. That's why they're choosing those 5 companies. Now, I received this email from American Express. I know it's kind of hard to read here, so I'll read it to you. But essentially, the body of the email says, our records show that your card might have been compromised by an unauthorized third party. An attempt to use your card was blocked today. Therefore, as a security measure, we have placed your card on hold until this concern is resolved. So now what they're trying to do is verify your recent activity. They're trying to get me to click on this. When I click on this, it brings me to a page and it's just a form that I can fill out. So it asks me for my name, date of birth, social, address, cell phone, email, password, asks me for everything. Now, typically when you receive a message like this, there will be some indication in that email that it's fraudulent. I would not stress yourself out by trying to find that one silver bullet, right? As a best practice, as a way to save time, the best case scenario or the best way to handle these emails is just go directly to the source. So if I get an email from American Express, close the email, go to the app on my phone and open up American Express. Close the email, take my card out of my wallet, dial the number on the back of the card. Close the email, go to a web browser, go to americanexpress.com and log in myself. Do not use any links, phone numbers, any information that you receive in an email or that you receive in a phone call. That is how they trick you. Always go directly to the source, and that way you can determine if there really is an issue with your American Express account. Just to show you the one thing that you'll notice with this email, it's kind of hard to tell, but there's this little dot under the E, and that right there is the giveaway. Everything else looks exactly as it's supposed to be. Same colors, same font, same logo. But when I click on the email address, again, you see this little E under, the little dot under the E in American Express. And then the final and last giveaway is the email address that it came from. It came from aco4@centurionfs.com. That is never an email address American Express would utilize. So right then and there, I know this is fraudulent. I simply delete the email, report it to American Express as phishing, send it over to them, send it to the FCC, whatever you got to do. But just know, again, the best course of action isn't to find out yourself whether it's phishing, it's to just go directly to the source.
Yeah, it is clever
Okay.
that, you know, just with regards to that American Express, you know, Centurion, that's what American Express uses as kind of their logo, that picture of the Roman centurion. So I could actually see someone falling for that. But with that said, let's say that, you know, and this has happened to me where I have actually fallen for a click the button. One of the things I always look for is the web address that you click to. And if there's nothing that says Amex or anything in there, it's almost certainly a phishing attempt.
Yeah, and there's actually one other way to make sure you're on the right site too. So if you're going to a reputable site that you can trust, in the bottom left-hand corner, there will be a little security lock. So it'll look just like a padlock, and that'll give you the indication that this is a secure website. Typically, like you mentioned with the web address, it'll be HTTPS, and that'll signify secure, and then it'll have that little padlock. So if you do get an email, a valid email from American Express, if there's fraud, if you do click on that link, there's a couple of ways that you can tell that you're on the right website and not on a fraudulent site as well.
Now, Christina, we're about 7 minutes from the hour, so I don't know how much more time you need, but we try to keep these around an hour. So.
Yeah, so I only have one more slide left, so we should be right at about time, which is perfect. So the last thing that I wanted to cover was how to defend against identity theft. And these are probably two really important aspects of really taking control of our personal information. Now, we encourage you to do both of these two things. If not both, hopefully you can do at least one. Now, the first is enrolling in credit monitoring services. So these are services like LifeLock or Triple Alert. They typically cost anywhere between $20 to $30 a month. And essentially what they do is they protect you on a daily basis, and they monitor your credit report on a daily basis for you. So like what we talked about earlier, pulling your credit report every 4 to 5 months. If you have credit monitoring services, you wouldn't have to necessarily worry about doing that because they're doing it for you on a daily basis. Couple things to note about credit monitoring services. Before you pay for these services, make sure that you can't get it somewhere else for free. So a couple of places, a lot of employers are now starting to offer it as part of their employees' benefits plan. A lot of credit cards or bank accounts are starting to offer it. If you have a certain type of card or if you have a certain type of account, you have access to some credit monitoring services. And then the last one is if you've been a victim of a major data breach. So like I mentioned before, I was impacted by Equifax. Because of that, Equifax is obligated to pay for me to have credit monitoring services for 10 years. That's part of their punishment or consequence to their data breach. And so again, like I mentioned, 85% of adult Americans were impacted by Equifax. So technically speaking, 85% of the US should be enrolled in credit monitoring services for the next 10 years, absolutely for free. So again, make sure that you can't get it somewhere else before you pay for it. If you have children or grandchildren under the age of 18 and you have credit monitoring services, I would strongly encourage you to add them to those credit monitoring services. It does not cost you anything extra to add someone under the age of 18. And like we talked about, kids are being targeted 10 times more often than adults for their social security number. And what's happening is kids are turning 18, they're applying for college, they're applying for their loans, and that's when they're realizing that they have hundreds of thousands of debt already accumulated in their name. So protect your kids and your grandkids. If you don't have credit monitoring services, you could pull their credit report same way you pull your own from creditreport.com. Now, the last thing here is freezing your credit. This is by far 100% the safest thing you can do. When your credit is frozen, nobody, including yourself, can open up any additional lines of credit. Personally, I think the new normal moving forward will be people will just leave their credit frozen. They'll unfreeze it when they need to take out a new line of credit. Once that line of credit has been taken out, they'll go ahead and freeze their credit again. Couple of important things to note about freezing your credit. First and foremost, it's free. You can do it as many times as you would like. There is no limit. It takes about 24 to 48 hours to freeze your credit, 24 to 48 hours to unfreeze your credit. You must freeze it at all 3 credit bureaus. If you only freeze it at 1 or 2, somebody could open up a line of credit using whichever credit bureau you have not frozen your credit at. And then the last thing I will say, and by far the most important, when you freeze your credit, they will give you a confirmation number. You must keep this confirmation number in a safe place because they will not let you unfreeze your credit unless you provide to them that confirmation number they gave you when you froze it. And remember, you'll have 3 of them, one from Equifax, one from TransUnion, one from Experian. So keep them in a very, very safe place. If you lose those confirmation numbers, you will be a very unhappy camper. It will take you hours, if not days, to provide the credit bureau with all the information they'll need to verify who you say you are to unfreeze your credit. So keep them in a safe place. That way you don't have to deal with any headaches. But with that, that is the end of my prepared comments for today. I know we covered a lot. So what I'll do is I'll just freeze here to see if we have any, questions or anything maybe I didn't cover that you want me to spend a little bit more time on.
Yeah, typically we usually have people who are pretty vociferous, but you covered everything. I haven't seen any questions that have popped up that you haven't actually answered. 3 takeaways from me personally are I love the opt-out screen link that you gave to us. I think let me just go back to it. It's www.optoutprescreen.com. So PRESCREEN. So I love that. The Brandon just texted me, I already opted out during the seminar. So that was one. Number 2, the freezing. I've already done that, pretty much after Equifax. That's exactly what I did, was I froze all 3 of my credit bureaus. And to your point, if you don't know that key, they will only provide it to you. There's nothing you can do. You can hem and haw to whoever's on the phone. They won't budge. And what they'll say is they'll send it to you by US mail. So it could take 7 to 10 days for you to actually get that passcode to unfreeze. And if you're in the middle of a mortgage application or whatever, that's not a good thing. And then the third thing that you mentioned, Christina, that I thought was fantastic was the credit monitoring for 10 years. I tell a lot of people, my father-in-law is a very cautious person and very cautious with his credit. And I said, listen, for all of us, our data is out there. It's just and mainly because of that Equifax breach. That was the holy grail of information. So your data is out there for all intents and purposes. And now it really comes down to deterring the thieves and detecting it if it actually does happen. So unfortunately, the bad news is for most of us, that information is floating out there. It's just a matter of how easy do you make it for the thieves to actually take advantage of it. And I think a lot of the things that Christina mentioned here are excellent. So I think we're going to wrap up. I see that's 1:30 Eastern right now. So we'll wrap up here. Thank you again, Christina, for your time. I think this information was fantastic. And I think that's it. So we'll sign off here. I hope everyone has a nice holiday season. And if you do have any questions on this, Christina, I have her contact information. We can certainly hook you up with that. So thanks again, and have a great holiday season. Bye-bye.